I'd like to say welcome to everyone today. I'm Andrea Schultz. I'm with the Office of Safety Act Implementation, and I'm here with Mr. George Rudy today. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is George Rudy. I'm a branch chief out of Washington, D.C. for the CTPAT program, and today what we're going to do is talk about the Safety Act, and what better place to be than here in Washington, D.C. and DHS headquarters with Andrea Schultz, Deputy Director.
Thank you. So I want to just do a couple of quick housekeeping notes here. You'll notice on the left-hand side of your screen that there is a chat section. If you have any questions, feel free to type your questions in as we go. We're also going to take questions and answers at the end. We'll try to keep up with questions as we go. If not, we'll get them at the end. If you've just dialed in today and you want to ask questions, there will be an opportunity for that at the end of our webinar. Also, at the end of our webinar, you will be able to download the slides that we are using today and also instructions on how to fill out the block designation. Those are both files that will be available for you. Are they at the bottom right now too? Oh, they're at the bottom now. You can download them at any time. So, anything else that we should start off with?
Just that, as I think while we're talking, you could type in the questions, and we're going to probably try and hit them as we go, but we probably prefer to do the majority of them at the end.
Yep.
So then we could, get through the slides within a good amount of time.
So one of the things that George and I talked about recently, and I know I got on a call with a couple of folks that had CTPAT Tier 3, a lot of people were saying, what is the Safety Act? So we've had this block designation set up for a couple of years now. Yep. It hasn't been exercised much, and I think one of the big reasons is because it seems very mysterious and people are confused. So let's try to clear that up and demystify the Safety Act. Basically, it's part of the Homeland Security Act of 2002, and what it does is it provides legal liability protections for the providers of anti-terrorism, qualified anti-terrorism technologies. So you might be sitting there thinking, I don't have an anti-terrorism technology, and I'm here to tell you that yes, you do. We consider what you do in terms of security, everything that you've done to earn your Tier 3 status as an anti-terrorism technology. And we'll talk a little bit later about scenarios that could come to play that might find you having some legal issues from third-party claims, and the Safety Act would be a really good process for helping you manage that risk. It's important to note that the protections from Safety Act come from an act of terrorism, third-party claims arising out of an act of terrorism, and the number one question we get from folks is, all right, so what does that mean? What's an act of terrorism? And for the purposes of Safety Act, an act of terrorism is when the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security has declared that it was an act of terrorism. So that's pretty much the basics. We're going to go into it in a little bit more detail as we get a little deeper in the presentation.
Okay, great, Andrea. And like you were saying, yeah, you might not be aware of it, but most of the things that you're doing, just being in the CTPAT program as a Tier 3 partner, you satisfy the requirement to be part of the Safety Act, to be designated within the CTPAT program, right? So like Andrea said, back in 2014, I was approached, and CTPAT program office and headquarters was approached, and we were asked, why does Safety Act exist, and yet we see a lot of the similarities between our programs, and CTPAT is not really involved at all with this. So I got a lot of feedback from the trade saying, hey, Rudy, let's go and do something, try and make it, both of you guys get together so we could be in the CTPAT and the Safety Act at the same time. So in 2014, we applied as a pre-applicant for the program. We were assigned a Safety Act advisor, right? His name was Gregory. Then we met with DHS internally with the director. We received the not CTPAT 101, but the Safety Act 101 just to learn about the Safety Act. What was it all about? What are the benefits? And that's what we're going to talk about later. So after we met internally, we got the documentation explaining how our technology would prevent or deter acts of terrorism, and how our partners in the program would be able to participate and take advantage of this, right? So the idea was to have CTPAT companies participate and get better at anti-terrorism prevention, because we have our minimum security criteria, and we've got our Tier 3 partners, which are the best of the best in the program, and so DHS really liked that, right? And so when they saw that, they said, yes, you're a good candidate to receive block coverage, And those Tier 3 partners applying to the program will get expedited treatment because of that. Excuse me, because of that. All right, so why the Safety Act? As I said before, we had a lot of demand from our partners who, before we even got block designation with the DHS and the Safety Act program, just that the desire for them to be in and made us get motivated to make this block designation happen. And we thought it also made a lot of sense because we're both anti-terrorism programs, and our criteria is all about having security in place that would deter or detect terrorism process from happening, right? So this provides also an additional benefit to CTPAT partners. It saves time and effort from those applying to the Safety Act, and it's an incentive to get better within the CTPAT program.
So incentive really is the right word, and we're going to talk a lot about that. So who gets to participate? Tell us about your Tier 3 members.
It's the Tier 3 members, because I kept reiterating, it's DHS wants, and the whole idea behind Congress implementing this with a DHS program is for our companies to get better, not just CTPAT partners, but companies all across the United States. It's just the CTPAT program is an avenue to make this process shorter and facilitate the process quicker. So this applies to importers and exporters who are Tier 3. And the requirements, of course, you have to be in good standing in the CTPAT program. Once you lose Tier 3 status or you get suspended because of security profiles are not up to date, you don't have your annual review completed, your risk assessments are not completed, your revalidations are not timely, and then you fail to revalidate, then something would happen if you happen to get the block designation. What would that be if you lose you get suspended in CTPAT program?
Right, so we're going to go over specifically what's included in the coverage and also what criteria are met in the block designation. But one of the things that's spelled out very clearly is that you have to be a CTPAT Tier 3 in good standing. So if you lose that good standing status, your Safety Act coverage is void until you regain that status.
Okay, and I want to point out something that just like the CTPAT program, DHS doesn't charge fees for being in the program, so it's another free program. So there's really no need to not take a chance and go through the process.
That's right.
That's really important.
And I'm going to talk about how easy the process is too. So it's really not a heavy lift. Let's start with what protections are available. Through the Safety Act program, there are 2 levels of protection. I know I have 3 badges up there. I'll explain the difference. We have Safety Act designation, which provides a cap on your liability. That's a big deal. You hear us talk about that all the time, to know that you have the right amount of insurance that has a cap on liability, that you cannot be held accountable for third-party claims resulting from an act of terrorism beyond that liability amount. That's a big deal. But guess what? There are some other big deals too. Exclusive action in federal court. So if you're having lawsuits filed in a local court or a state court, they're going to be streamlined up to the federal court. This could save you a lot of time and a lot of resources in court fees and court costs.
Yeah, that was my first thought. When I heard about that, I thought, boy, this is a miraculous thing.
It's
huge. So you're telling me the state and local courts, it'll just be pushed up, all liability up to the federal courts.
Yep.
Wow, that's amazing.
No joint and several liability, which is confusing.
Yes.
But basically what that means, if there's multiple parties named in a suit, and let's say the judge and jury say everybody's 20% culpable, right? Okay. Everybody's 20% culpable. 4 out of the 5 companies go out of business, declare bankruptcy. You're the big guy left in the room. You're left holding the bill. That's what joint and several liability means. With the Safety Act, you're protected from that. You're only held accountable for what you're held accountable by the court. The other thing is no punitive damages. That's huge. No punitive damages. It's just for actual damages.
Okay, so when I hear that, no punitive damages, I hear that, okay, it's just a straight lawsuit without any additional damages. It's actual
damages. So the actual cost of damages will be awarded, but not an excess of however much money to punish the company, which is essentially what punitive damages
So
are.
A company could potentially save millions of dollars if the worst of the worst happens to them.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And then finally, no prejudgment interest. So if you look at the case of the '93 World Trade Center bombing, We know that that court case was tied up for decades, literally. And so a judge could award prejudgment interest, saying that at the end of that case, here's the X amount of money due, and we're going to tack interest on from the day that the case was first filed. So you're protected from that with the Safety Act, which is really a very big deal. That's what we're going to really focus on today, is the designation. I do want to briefly touch on certification and what that means. Certification allows all of the same benefits that come with designation, but it also allows the applicant to assert the government contractor defense, which means the judge could potentially dismiss the suit altogether.
Wow.
Which is a huge deal. Also, we're going to place the technology, which we use that word pretty loosely here, technology, on our approved products list for Homeland Security, which means it's going to go up on the DHS and the Safety Act website.
Okay, I want to point out that the technology in this case, because we're talking about the CTPAT program, would be the CTPAT program, the criteria that we have in place, the security risk assessments, the annual reviews, everything that we have in place that we go through the CTPAT process in their criteria, the personnel screening, security screening, physical access controls, everything in there. So when you hear that term,
that's what we mean.
Technology.
Technology is our jargon word. Yes.
Yeah, because it took me a while to figure out. You keep saying technology. What does that mean? So the technology could be a device, in some cases, right? But
it could be a widget, but it could also be a system of widgets.
A system, and we're the system.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to clear that up, and it sort of takes a while to have that sink in.
Correct. And then also hiding in the lower left-hand side of the slide here, you see a little green badge, and that's for developmental testing and evaluation designation. And that's if there's a technology out there that, let's say, is very promising, but hasn't really been field tested yet. But still, there's potential liability. We're going to put it out there in the real world while we test it. We might want to get some protection for that deployment as we go through the testing and evaluation. It's the same protections that I talked about with designation, but it's for a shorter period of time and a limited deployment. But again, today, for the block designation, we're going to focus on what I put in that big red block there.
That's what I was going to ask you. Where do we fall?
We're going to fall.
Blue badge.
We're the blue badge, and we're designation, which is a big deal. So we mentioned earlier, why CTPAT? What would be the potential liability we could face as an importer?
Some examples.
Yeah, here's an example. I put some nice graphics on the screen to
Those
try
are frightening graphics.
They're frightening graphics. So you're bringing in goods and products from all over the globe. You kind of have a fast pass at the port, right?
So that's what you could call it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a TSA pre-check.
As a matter of fact, we do have fast lanes, and you have to be in the CTPAT program to take advantage of those fast lanes. So you're using the right phrases there.
Cool. So if somebody were to bring something in one of your containers, obviously you've worked really, really hard to prevent that. But we all know that in this world, there's no way to completely eliminate risk. What we're looking for is the best that you can do, and that's what you've already achieved with the Tier 3 program. But where could you potentially have some liability? If somebody brought in some weapons, some explosives, some hazardous materials, or even some people who came into this country and caused a horrific act of terrorism, you could potentially be facing a lawsuit. And that's why we're here today, to talk about how to protect you from that end-of-the-line lawsuit, because you have already done your due diligence to reduce that risk.
And so I understand there's a lot of companies out there that already have some of the insurances regarding terrorism in place.
Correct.
What's the likelihood of that? It's just a...
So let's say I'm a company and I have $200 million worth of insurance.
All right.
And there's an incident where my cargo container was used to smuggle in radioactive material, or even people who came into this country and caused a terrorist incident. That $200 million might be a drop in the bucket as to where my liability might fall. So while I'm insured at $200 million, let's say the lawsuit comes back and I owe $400 million. Well, you have a significant gap there, and the company is going to pay that. With the Safety Act protections, if $200 million is the appropriate liability limit, you're insured to $200 million, which means that your business is going to be open tomorrow. Wow. You're not going to face...
yeah, because bouncing back from that type of lawsuit is
catastrophic to a
yeah,
business.
it would put you out of business. So
Right.
it's a good thing that Safety Act's here.
Good. I'm glad.
Of course, the time saved is a significant amount. I mean, you could see it on here. This is the processing time that this PowerPoint displays, right? You could see it, typically your application, if you applied outside of the CTPAT program, is 120 days, right? But within the CTPAT program, this is the processing time is 90 days. But I understand it's a lot worse than that if you don't apply within the CTPAT program, because there's huge amounts of documentation that you have to present to prove to DHS that, yes, we do have a technology that meets your minimum levels of acceptance, right?
Correct.
So tell us about processing time.
Okay.
Not processing time,
But the
paperwork,
whole
the whole thing, yeah.
So we are going to go over a slide in a couple of slides to talk about all the things we look at. But one of the things that we've tried to do here at the Safety Act is reduce the homework burden on the applicant, because you've done a lot of homework already
Yep.
by working through the CTPAT Tier 3 program. Well, guess what? We work for the same agency. Look
That's
at that.
right.
We're working together.
We use the same badges.
I know, everything. So what we want to do is we want to say, we're going to give credit for the work that was already done. We're not going to make you do the long math again. We already know how you got to the answer. So our processing time for a normal application is 120 days. That's a ballpark. Sometimes it takes us a little longer. Sometimes we're a little faster. But that's 120 calendar days. If you apply under the block designation, we work really hard to turn that around in 90 days. But like you said, that's just our processing time. Some people work on their applications. Think about how hard you worked to obtain your Tier 3. That's probably how hard you would work on your Safety Act application if you weren't coming in for the block designation. So there's probably a year's worth of work to compile all that information and go through all that testing. So it saves you time not only through our review process, but also all the pre-work that you would have to do to get there. So what are the basics on streamlining? So like I said, we assume that you already have done all the homework. We know that. We're going to confirm that with George and his team when you submit an application. We know that the Government Program Office has already evaluated or assessed your technology. Again, we're using that word technology to describe the CTPAT Tier 3 status.
Yeah, and I like to say that, yeah, the ones the companies that I know that are in CTPAT that have gone through this process before, as soon as we joined up with the Safety Act, I was receiving phone calls, hey, what's the status of the program? So DHS was checking with us to make sure that you were validated and certified and all that. So I just wanted to put that in there.
That's one of the very first phone calls that we make.
Yeah.
We also want to make sure that you can get the insurance, because we do have a requirement that you carry insurance up to that liability limit at a minimum to make sure you cover that.
But I would think most companies that may be at high risk already have that insurance, or just part of doing business overall, you have some types of insurance. And this is terror insurance, right?
Correct.
Okay,
it's
so it's
insurance that would
type.
respond to an act of terrorism. And you're right. In most cases, applicants already have that in
already
place.
have it anyway. So,
But if you don't, we can help you find that out.
Okay, great.
Okay, so what exactly is covered? And we touched on this a little bit earlier. Over the next two slides are the actual terms and conditions of this block program. You'll notice, I'm not going to read through all of this, but you'll notice that you have to have your Tier 3, and you also were making a commitment to do an expedited review of your application. And it's anyone who is already at the Tier 3 level can apply for the Safety Act protections using the block designation. Now, we both received a question in the past about why can't the Tier 3 folks apply?
I was just going to bring that up, so I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay, good.
The Tier 2.
The Tier 2, I'm sorry, you're right. And the short answer to that is, of course, they can apply. Tier 2 folks can apply.
Yes, they can.
They just can't apply using this streamlined process.
Yeah.
So this streamlined process, we're trying to incentivize those Tier 2 folks to come up to the next level and become a Tier 3.
Yeah.
So if you already are Tier 3, you get to pat yourself on the back with this streamlined process. And if you're Tier 2, you can come in with a traditional application. There's nothing wrong with that, but it probably saves you a lot of time and energy if you just go for the Tier 3 and come in with the streamlined
and
process.
achieving Tier 3 is not easy, because everyone on the line now is Tier 3, and they know it's difficult to obtain, difficult to get approved within headquarters here, and it's difficult to hang on to Tier 3.
Yeah.
Because at any time, if they slack, they might lose Tier 3 status. So folks out there listening, strive to keep your status up and running and be the elite of our program.
Okay, great. Okay, should we look at one of these questions? How do we determine the amount of insurance coverage a company will need? That's a great question. I can talk about that right now. I'm going to go over in a couple of slides the type of information that we collect from you. And that's kind of how we determine that. So us over here at DHS, we're going to do an analysis of not only your revenue, but your projected revenue, the insurance that you currently have in place, and we're going to look at the industry and kind of see what's out there for any industry. We want to set a liability cap that's reasonable, but also that isn't going to distort the cost of you doing business and of you continuing to do the good work in security. So that was a really good question. Are there public cases we can use to quantify the Safety Act benefit? And I wish that we had our Office of General Counsel on the phone right now, because she would answer this really, really well. I would say to quantify the Safety Act benefit, right now the Safety Act has not been tested, hasn't been used. We haven't had an act of terrorism in which a Safety Act protected product has been implicated.
Yeah, because I understand when we did have the terror attacks, none of this was in place, and it's a result of the terror attacks. So
Yes.
now it's in place, and it's dependent on who's has applied to the program.
Correct.
So luckily that hasn't happened, and knock on wood, it won't ever happen. And that's what we would, that's what we're trying to do. We're
Correct.
trying to prevent and deter this from happening, because these processes like the CTPAT program is the technology to act as a deterrent. So hopefully terrorists will see there's processes in place to stop this from happening. So yeah, there wouldn't be.
There wouldn't. But you can look at several of these cases that have taken place, like the 93 World Trade Center bombing, like the Murrah building explosion, like the 9/11 incidents that occurred in New York and DC. And there's case history out there to show you what type of damages were awarded in those
Before
the Safety
Act
Act
kicked in.
So you can see where those damages could be pretty high.
That's right.
We'll do one more question, then we'll move on and come back to other questions. If you don't have an insurance plan, are you still covered by the Safety Act? So the Safety Act, one of the requirements is that you obtain insurance that would respond to an act of terrorism.
All right.
So it kind of goes hand in hand. You don't have to have an insurance plan when you apply. What we ask you to do is obtain quotes from an insurance company, and then we kind of work together from there. We do manage every single application on a case-by-case basis. An insurance limit for one company is not necessarily going to be reflective of everybody. It's each individual.
So it's based on your company income, revenue?
Absolutely right.
Okay, so
Yep.
So a larger company will have, obviously, they have more assets to protect.
Correct, and they have a higher risk too, because they're
Absolutely.
probably doing a little bit more business at the port than a smaller company is. Okay, so what is the protection? The next two slides, this is exactly what's included in what we like to call the Exhibit A. This is what you would bring into court should you ever have to use your Safety Act protections. And again, I'm not going to read this line by line.
It's all CTPAT stuff there.
It's all CTPAT stuff. So it's exactly what you do. It's exactly what's covered. This was coordinated closely between Customs, CBP, and S&T when we put all of this together.
Yeah, so everything that you're already doing, again, here's the criteria. You could see it there, container security through container inspection, storage, and the use of seals, the training, everything you know as an elite Tier 3 partner. So that's what we would call that the Exhibit A.
We call
right?
that Exhibit A. We call that your technology. This is our description of your technology. And you'll see that last bullet. It says, these security elements function as a system to prevent cargo tampering in the international supply chain. Okay. So that's what your technology is. It's this system of activities and technologies together that work together to help prevent terrorism.
And I could see why it's so important to have a Tier 3 partner bring this into court so that when the judge sees this, there would be no doubt in his mind when he sees this, wow, this is above and beyond. No doubt does this qualify for the Safety Act program.
Correct.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Okay, so how do we apply?
How do you apply? That's the big question.
Yeah, we try to keep it simple. Some people get stressed out and confused, and hopefully we're going to demystify that today. But you go to our website, which is www.safetyact.gov. Pretty easy to remember. You'll see on the right-hand side, this is a screenshot of our website. On the right-hand side, there's a blue link that says Active Block Designations, and that'll take you to a next page, and you just scroll down until you find the one for CTPAT Tier 3, and there are instructions right there, which I also mentioned. The designation instructions are on your screen, and you can download them at any time.
Wonderful.
There are a lot of things we're going to look for in the application. You will see here BD stands for Block Designation 1. That's kind of our naming acronym. So there are 12 questions, but it's kind of like, what was that movie with...
Talladega Nights.
No, not Talladega Nights. Much older than that, when he goes, I have one question in 42 parts. So I will admit, that's kind of what our questions are like, one question in 42 parts. You'll notice that I put a big red X across, or a big red slash across questions 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah.
That's really the meat of any application. But guess what? The meat of that application is already done through the CTPAT Tier 3. So questions 1 through 7 are really, who are you? Put your name in the top right-hand corner of the test. And question 11 and 12, we're going to go through in a little bit of detail next, because this is how we set the liability limit. So next slide, please. Back to School, my colleagues offline are telling me, is the name of the movie I was trying to say.
Oh.
Thank you very much. So here's one of the big things that happens. We get applications all the time that were filled out by someone who works in the security department, which I would imagine most of the folks on the line are. And so you get to these insurance questions and you go, and you just absolutely don't know how to answer them. Please enlist somebody from the risk management shop or from within your own internal legal team, or the person that writes the check to the insurance company would be a great person to pull into the room to say, help me answer these questions, because we are going to need these to be answered fully in order for us to do an evaluation. We want to know whose name's on the insurance policy. Do you have other companies named on your insurance policy? That happens sometimes.
And I would imagine that you all would be able to walk them through some of it?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
If you have questions, I'm going to go over our contact information in the end. But these are the kind of things that we need. We need to know, how much do you pay for your insurance? What are your premiums? What type of policy do you have? When did it start? You can see it all listed here. Continued on, here we see a description of the limits. So we want to know what you think you're covered for. Sometimes we find that people think they have coverage for X and they actually have coverage for Y, and going through the Safety Act process is an education for a lot of our applicants as well. So
this is almost like a free consulting type of review and audit of your stuff,
I
just
think
to go through to see
I think
what
there's
you
a lot
have.
of internal learning that goes on.
And the same thing happens within the CTPAT program when we go out to analyze supply chain security.
Yep.
We help the companies realize, hey, you do have this in place and you don't. So this is more of the same type stuff, but regarding insurance. So.
Yep. And all of this can be answered, in a Word document. Just write it out for us and submit it that way. So unavailability of insurance, and somebody asked this question earlier. If you don't already have insurance, get some quotes, call your broker, say how much is it going to cost us to add insurance that would respond to an act of terrorism. And what we need is a binding quote. You can submit that to us, but don't go ahead and buy insurance until after you've gone through the process. When you do call your broker, you do want to say, hey, let's assume for the purposes of this conversation and the purpose of this quote that I already have the Safety Act. So make sure you tell that to your insurance broker, because it may or may not make a difference there. And we'd like a point of contact. So if what you've submitted to us confuses us, because that happens sometimes too, please tell us who we should pick up the phone and call. It may or may not be you as the applicant, as our main point of contact. It might be somebody else within your organization. We also need to know what you think your revenue projections are. Again, we talked about this earlier. This is going to help us set a reasonable insurance limit for you. So we'd like to know for the next 3 years what you think your projected revenue might be. If you have the current year if you don't have your current year sales, just give us your projected revenue data. and summarize this with the cost that your company has for doing CTPAT. So all of those things we talked about in the Exhibit A. If you could give us an estimated cost for what that security technology costs you in terms of salary, actual hard technologies that you deploy, manpower, things like that, how much does it cost you to participate in the CTPAT program? Not obviously fees to the government, but your cost of doing business. We want to know what that is.
Yeah.
And the deployment of your technology. So how many different ports are you operating in? We need to know that too. What kind of, what type of business you're doing at the ports.
Okay.
Let us know what that is. And then.
So would that encompass their international?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So abroad, because a lot of these companies, you know, they're involved in
overseas.
international trade.
Yeah. So let us know how many countries you're operating in too. That would be very helpful. And then the last thing under here is, could you please come up with a scenario for a third-party claim? I kind of already did your homework for you on that one, the slide a few slides ago with the explosions and the bad stuff.
That's right.
That's a good scenario there. So the next slide, please.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I hope you can answer now.
I hope I
But
can.
if it's, so say something happens, because these are all international supply chains, and they're covered with the Safety Act in the United States, but something happens abroad, which it's likely,
Yeah.
right? How would that impact their coverage?
So how
Would
does
that
that
protect
impact
them
their
at all,
coverage? It would protect them in a U.S. court, that's for sure.
Okay.
So if there was a lawsuit filed here in a U.S. court, your
Now that's
Safety Act
very
protections apply.
All right.
Absolutely. And so that kind of gets to the question that's up on the page here. Does it include international insurance?
There you go.
So we'll do that insurance evaluation with you as we go through the application process. But what the Safety Act does is provide those liability limits here in a U.S. court.
All right.
So hope that makes sense.
And I would think most of the importers and exporters, they have their offices in the United States, but they're importing and exporting, you know, with their businesses abroad.
Yes. I had one more slide here on our application requirements, and that was about the financial data. So it might be protected, or your technology revenue is relevant to the application process. What we want to make sure in our office, and I touched on this earlier, is we don't want to price the insurance. We don't want to make a requirement for insurance so high that from a business perspective, you can't do what you do anymore. We don't want you to cut the security work you're doing at the price of insurance. So that's really why we do this analysis, to make sure that we are not making a requirement that's too difficult for you to meet.
Okay. So that would change, because that was running through my mind too, because, okay, you have to get the insurance. I mean, how costly is the insurance? And you said it's based on the size of the company. So you're trying to be reasonable, so you're not putting a company out of business.
Right.
Pretty much, right?
Right.
So
we're trying to incentivize folks. Now, it does happen sometimes that we find people are underinsured, should probably be carrying more insurance. And sometimes there is a requirement that they purchase additional insurance. Sometimes we find people have maybe 10 times the amount of insurance that we think is necessary or required. That happens sometimes too. A lot of times people are right in line with where they should be. So, like I said, we do an analysis of each application individually. What I have here is contact information. So like I said, you might be confused. This is drinking from a fire hose. We've given a lot of information in a short amount of time.
It takes a while for it to sink in.
It does take a while. And our team is here to help. We are absolutely here to help. The email address on the screen, Safety Act Help Desk at dhs.gov, is manned by a lot of folks. So fire any questions at us. If you'd like to set up a consultation with us, you can either call the 1-866, that toll-free number there, or send an email, and we will set up a call with you, a technical call to walk you through any of this.
So who answers the line, the toll-free? So that would be just operators? Or
just
would it
our
be
staff. Our staff. It goes to a
okay.
few different people's desks. And so it is Monday through Friday, but we do have a voicemail there. Also, on our website, there are a lot of frequently asked question pages, help desk topics, the user guide, fact sheets. This webinar will be posted there in the future. So if you were recording this, if you wanted to watch it again later, there's a lot of really good stuff on our website.
Wonderful.
So I think that's the end of our slide deck. I wanted to open the phone for questions and also keep looking through the questions on the left here. Mia, if you could offer an opportunity for folks to ask questions, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. If you'd like to ask a question, please press star and 1 on your phone. Be sure to unmute your phone and record your name clearly. Again, star and 1 with any questions. One moment while we wait for the first one.
Okay, great. While we're waiting, I see a really good question on the left-hand side here. Once approved by DHS to participate in the Safety Act program, does the program have a similar annual review to be performed by the importer or a revalidation as we do with CTPAT Tier 3? What a great question. Your Safety Act designation is good for 5 years.
That's right.
There will be a gap in your protection if you lose your Tier 3, but if you obtain your Tier 3 or you maintain your Tier 3 for that entire 5-year period, you can come in to renew your Safety Act application. You can submit a renewal application anytime before 2 years before expiration. So most people come in about 6 months before their protections
That's
expire.
a good idea. Yeah.
Yep.
Come in, so then when it overlaps, because the CTPAT
Then there's no
program
gap.
revalidates every 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and DHS, the Safety Act is 5.
5
so
years.
then, yeah, you want to do it. You could even ask your specialist if you want to do a validation within the CTPAT program a little earlier. So if there's any awkward overlapping, you don't
There
get
shouldn't
caught
be
in
any
the middle.
gaps.
Yeah.
Yep. Does the benefit apply? Does the benefit apply to or subsidiaries of the Tier 3 who are registered with CTPAT? So could you explain to me the subsidiaries of T3 who are registered?
So I think we're talking about legal entities that are under the same umbrella?
Yeah,
Sellers?
multiple.
Also, I think,
we
from what I
talking-
understand, it does, right? If it's,
So Mr. Santos, I hope I answer your question correctly because I might not. Oh, here we go. Just to clarify, what's the process for Tier 2 since they are eligible and the vast majority of our importer membership? So again, the process for Tier 2 would be to submit a traditional Safety Act application, which you can find on safetyact.gov. So you're going to need to provide to us those questions that I had slashed out on an earlier slide that I really didn't discuss in length. There is a good amount of evidence of effectiveness that we're going to need to see. So I want to say I could talk about that alone for probably 90 minutes.
Whoa.
And if we wanted to do a webinar on that later. But we do have some webinars on our website that talk about how to submit a really good application.
Yeah.
Before we go to another question on the screen, Mia, do we have anybody waiting on the line?
No questions holding. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please press 1 and record your name.
Okay. So we have another good question on the screen. Will the Safety Act be linked with the CTPAT Portal 2.0? If not, how will this program be integrated? How will this program integration expected to be managed by the trade community? I'm going to throw that one to
Yeah,
you.
right. At this time, we're trying to get our portal where we want it to be, as everybody knows. So right now, no. That's been a thought. That's been something I've been thinking about. So maybe that's something in a future direction. At this moment, no, it's not.
Not linked.
No.
But I got to tell you, it might have sounded like a big burden what I described, but it's really pretty easy.
Yeah.
So you can just come over to safetyact.gov, go into that link where I talked about to get the application. You basically submit that you are a Tier 3 certified member. I believe you told me they get an email that says that, so PDF that email and send it to us along with the insurance and the financial questions, and then submit it and we'll take it from there. So it's not that challenging to kind of go through that application. We have another question here. Someone was under the impression that only importers qualified for a Tier 3 or a tier under CTPAT. It is stated on slide 11. Can you go back to slide 11 so I can reference that? However, that the entities that provide shipping services that are currently certified at Tier 3 level are freight forwarders, logistics providers.
No, it's importers and exporters. Yeah, I know the slide does say something about shippers, but that's just the wording is off. It would be the importers and exporters
Okay.
who have that availability to apply to Safety Act within the CTPAT program, because they're the only ones that are eligible for Tier 3.
I think this next question is also for you, George. What if CTPAT determines during PIA or through investigation that importer-exporter is negligent, which resulted in an act of terror breach? Will they be exempt from liability then? I want
That's tricky.
Yeah, let's just start with, you're not exempt from liability. You have a liability cap with designation. So let me clarify that piece right there. Can you scroll back up so I can reference that? Thank you so much. The importer-exporter is negligent. So I think he's asking if the Tier 3 person is negligent.
I would think, yeah, if they're found negligent as a result of the investigation, when we have an investigation after there's a breach,
Right.
in the case of narcotics or even a terror incident. So that would suspend the company
Right.
at that point in time. The time of the breach, that would be in your court, because I'm not sure if they would be covered at the time, and then there's an investigation, then they'll determine that they are negligent.
Right.
So in the eyes of the law, the court, I would think
Right.
they would not be covered.
So if you're not compliant with your CTPAT Tier 3 coverage, if you're not in compliance, I think is
Yeah.
the right word, then no, your Safety Act protections do not apply. If you maintain that compliance, then your Safety Act protections
That's the
apply.
whole idea, yeah, to keep your levels of security up to the point where
Yeah.
you're not going to be found negligent. Now, if you're doing everything, as we always say in the CTPAT program, if you're doing your due diligence, then the eyes of the law will reflect that and say, okay, yeah, you remain just as what happens now within the CTPAT program. If you're found after a PIA that you've done what you could do, typically a company will remain in the program because they've done everything that they could do. They've made deterrents, they've put the minimum security criteria in place and in effect, but there will always be something, internal conspiracies or other rogue drivers or rogue somebody inside just determined to make sure that something goes wrong. So, but the company, as long as they're doing whatever they have to do to prevent it and deter
Yeah.
a terror attack or any other type of incident, right? In this case, terror attack.
Yep. Mia, I want to check in with you again to see if we have anyone waiting on the line.
No questions.
Okay, we're getting lots of questions in the chat box, so that's good. Let me see. He's moving them quickly, so I can't read. A recorded version of this will be helpful when a meeting explaining the program to our risk management folks. Yes, a recorded version will be available. It'll take a couple days. We'll probably have it uploaded to our website next week. And that's safetyact.gov. Excellent, thank you. Okay, subsidiaries of a Tier 3 IORs under the Tier 3 importer?
Okay.
IORs.
The importer of record
Okay.
numbers. Okay, but what's the question? It's kind of a fragment. I don't know. I'll go to the next one.
Why isn't the Safety Act automatic registration for Tier 3 members? Because this is a voluntary program. We're a separate program from CTPAT Tier 3. What we've tried to do is streamline it as much as possible. But you do actually have to take that step into our world in order to receive the Safety Act protections. I want to say it almost is automatic because we take that Tier 3 certification as
All the homework, like you were
yeah,
saying.
it's again, like we just said, it's a fast pass at the port.
Yeah.
It's a fast pass into our program as well.
So it's quasi-automatic. I mean, it's saving you
Time.
huge amounts of time, just gathering all the paperwork. Everything that you did to obtain your Tier 3 status, you're getting credit for that.
You're
pretty
getting
much,
credit for that. And then the other reason why it's not automatic is because I don't believe you do financial analysis and insurance analysis of your participants. So that's something that we do that's separate, and so you have to come through and apply for that. Are subsidiaries of the Tier 3 importers covered if they are registered in the portal? So I think that's where we come into the question that I talked about earlier. If you have other groups that are named as insured, What we call our applicants are the seller. Again, that's our jargon. But if you were to come in and receive Safety Act protections for your technology, which I already explained, you are now the seller of that technology. Of course, you're not selling it to anybody. You're selling it to your own company, that service, but you're the seller of that company. So if there are other entities and there are subsidiaries that need to be named and protected, then you would let us know that through the application process. And that's something that we can work specifically with you one-on-one to help determine if other people need to be named.
So it sounds like they would have to be covered under your insurance policy also?
There might be additional insurances. They might be named as an insured. Just call us. Call us and we'll talk through it. Explain to us what your operational environment is, and we'll work that out for you.
Because I think you guys also have insurance experts here too.
Yes.
Okay, so
yes,
yeah.
we do.
That's what the initial when we first applied. I heard a lot about that. We have insurance, doctorates, and insurance. So
yeah, we do have some smart folks.
Some smart guys and girls here.
So I don't see any additional questions on the left. Well, one person's typing now, and we'll give one more try on the line here. Are there any other questions on the phone?
No questions.
Okay. Could you confirm, if I understand correctly, once you're approved to be covered by the Safety Act, and after the 5-year period, is the continuation of participation automatic, or do you need to reapply? You need to reapply, but the reapplication process will be just as simple as the initial. You basically need to show us that you are still a Tier 3 member in good standing, and then we will reevaluate. I'm sure your financial information may have changed 5 years later, so we need to reevaluate the financial picture. But you do need to reapply, actively reapply.
And don't forget, during that time, though, also, if you lose your status, it'll be reported that you lost your status within the CTPAT program.
Yep.
Right, so.
Great. So last opportunity for any other questions. We have one more person typing in here. And if we didn't get to your question, I think we did a good job of answering most of them. But if we didn't get to your question, we will go through these later and try to make sure we address everyone's questions. And I apologize for the squinting, but the font is pretty small.
It's pretty small. We have many screens up at the same time. So
yep.
It's amazing we could see it.
Okay, if you lose your Tier 3 status, do you need to reapply using the longer process? Okay, that's a really good question. If you lose your Tier 3 status, the way it was explained to me, and Georgia's a good opportunity for you to educate me as well. Sometimes people lose their Tier 3 status while they're going through an investigation, and then they get it back.
It'll be suspended temporarily because of whatever incident, and then the PIA, the investigation afterwards, proves that the company was not at fault. Again, they did whatever they could to prevent this from happening, but yet you've got internal conspiracies. All your employees are not robots, so you can't control them. They're going to do what they want to do. And then the companies get back in and maintain their Tier 3 status, and then you're back on again. So I'm thinking, they're asking in that time that they're down, suspended, what happens?
So you don't need to come in and reapply.
Okay.
But for that time that you're suspended, let's say there was an incident that occurred during that time period. No, your Safety Act protections would not apply. So let's say from April 1st until April 30th, you have no Tier 3 status. You also have no Safety Act status during that time period. So if there's a breach that results in an act of terrorism, that results in a third-party lawsuit against you and your company, and it dates back to that time period window, then no, your Safety Act protection is not in place. So just like George mentioned earlier, this is also a really good incentive for you to work very hard to maintain continuous Tier 3 coverage. You don't need to reapply if the Tier 3 comes back online. When you need to reapply is at the end of that 5 year.
So it's just a temporary shutdown until we figure out what's going on. And then typically we won't shut off benefits until the end of the PIA. We figure out that are you at fault or not.
Right.
So that you might not lose any of that status at all.
Right. There's a financial question here. If our financial information changes over the 5 year period, do we have to make any changes to the insurance premiums, or are the premiums fixed for 5 years? So when we write a letter saying that you have Safety Act protections, and this is the amount of insurance that you have to maintain, we also include in that letter that we may do a reevaluation after 1 year just to make sure we did it right. So we might be reaching back out to you in a year to say, hey, what's going on? How are the insurance premiums? Are your financials coming in the way we thought that they were going to? We'll take a look at it. When you reapply, we're going to reassess. So we may find that you are still carrying the right amount of insurance. We may find that it needs to go up. We may find that it can go down. If you're making significant continual reinvestments in your security technology and you have lowered your risk, or let's say you're operating at half the ports that you were 5 years ago or double the ports that you are 5 years ago, these are all things that could affect the insurance. I am waiting on the results for my Tier 3 reevaluation. Can I apply while I'm waiting on the results? So you tell me what that means when we're waiting on the results.
That means if it's a revalidation, then you'll still be in good standing. You'll still have your status. So you could, if you're still in good standing, unless you were suspended, then you probably can't, because then you won't have status.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. CTPAT requires annual security reviews and a 4-year revalidation. From what you're saying, Safety Act just requires maintaining the CTPAT status. I'm going to say the CTPAT Tier 3 status. I'm not sure I understand what else is required for being a member of the Safety Act other than meeting the CTPAT criteria and the ins and outs of the application requirement of the Safety Act. So you're right. We've really oversimplified it. I mean, I hope that's what you're trying to say here. You don't understand what's required. If you had gone through a full application process, you would come at this and go, oh, heck, you Tier 3 people, you don't even know how easy you have it. People that have gone through the full application process have sometimes worked on that application for a year. 12 months, 18 months of working to ensure that they've gathered all the evidence that their technology is effective. And that includes everything from hiring records to policies and procedures that are in place, to assessments that have been done. Have there been any third-party assessments done? How have you addressed anomalies that have been identified in your assessments? What are your plans? How have you exercised your plans? Where are the after-action reports for your plans? It takes a lot for people to compile that information. So if you're coming in through this block designation, we're not asking you for all of that information. We're asking for validation that you are a CTPAT Tier 3 in good standing. So you're right. I think I've answered your question, but you're right. Other than meeting that CTPAT Tier 3 criteria and sharing with us what your revenue projections are and your insurance, that's all you got to do. It's pretty easy.
Sounds easy to me.
It does sound easy. Okay.
Is that it?
I think that might be it. So, Mia, last opportunity for anyone on the line, but I think I know what you're going to say.
No question.
Okay.
Shy people.
Shy people, but everybody asked a lot of questions on the screen, so I'm excited.
Yeah, we have enough. A lot of good questions.
So thank you again for coming over here today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you, everybody, for dialing in. This has been really fantastic, and look for this webinar in about a week.
Yep. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.